Dr. Jones, I need your help. This way, Dr. Jones.
Who are you, kid?
No time to explain. We need to go now.
I see, Dr. Jones, you're still on your search for the historical Jesus, and what was previously yours is now mine.
Ditch the artifact. We have bigger problems to attend to. Look, Elvis has come back.
There's a snake in the text, Jonathan!
Oh, that's just the last 12 verses of Mark.
I hate snakes, Jonathan! I really hate them!
The Aeneid was written in a period of time that is exceptionally well documented, compared to the circumstances in which the Tzu-Chuan and Homeric epics were composed. This allows us to understand in good detail the context of the Aeneid's formation. Given this, Dr. Carrier, and your assertion that the formation of the canon of the New Testament, which the Apostolic Churches wrote explaining how it was done and by who, is not true, that is, the Apostolic Polity, and which is described in the writings of Irenaeus of Lyons, Tertullian of Carthage, Eusebius of Caesarea, and the Anglican divine Richard Hooker, then you should be able to give some ancient documentation to trace when and where the commonly received texts of the Apostolic Churches were written, how copies of the originals were sent out, and translations of the same, as Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Gaius during the late 2nd century were able to name some of the authors and provide details for the formation of the so-called Gnostic texts. For example, Marcion, Valentinus, and Basilides. Therefore, Dr. Carrier, if you maintain the hypothesis that the original publications of Mark's Gospel, when received by the Apostolic Churches, were indeed deficient these 12 verses, then by what natural mechanism did these 12 verses find their way into independent Apostolic Churches texts, that were of different theological positions, and were spread over a vast geographic area from Galilee and Jerusalem to Britain in the west, India in the east, Ethiopia and North Africa in the south, and Germany in the north? These verses would have also had to be translated into multiple languages to include the Vetus Latin, Aramaic, Gothic, Ge'ez, and Coptic. We must also consider the following. Who created this passage? How did this individual gain access to physical texts in the actual Apostolic Churches? Where and when did this process to update the texts first begin? Because if it wasn't Peter's disciple Mark, then who did it, and how? Surely, Dr. Carrier, you would not have us believe that the creation and appending of these 12 verses to actual physical texts came ex nihilo. Even though I don't agree with Anthony Fenton Hort and F.C. Burkett as Anglicans, they did understand the need for a theoretical mechanism to help explain the existence of readings. For example, the long ending of Mark, LE, that are in the commonly received texts of the Greek and Aramaic Apostolic Churches. By proposing a recension by Lucan of Antioch in the Greek, and a recension by Rabula of Edessa in the Peshitta, they could use both recensions to defend their so-called best and earliest texts, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, that are deficient these 12 verses. But here lies the problem with this school of thought that you lean on, Dr. Carrier, which is the basis for these interpolation theories on the LE and other traditional readings. Since the creation of these theories in the late 18th century that began with scholars such as Griesbach, as noted by Bergen, this scholarship has been unable to historically substantiate these theories, For this is what J.N. Birdsall is saying in referring to his own work and the work of Lake, Lagrange, Caldwell, and Streeter when he declares, "It is evident that all presuppositions concerning the Byzantine text, or texts, except its inferiority to other types, must be doubted and investigated de novo. Who maintains their conclusions when the hypothesis continues to fail?" Kurt and Barbara Land seem to agree with Birdsall when they state, "No adequate history has yet been written of the Byzantine text, but this is a task we may well leave to a future generation." In other words, all this school of thought has provided is postmodern narratives to explain the creation of these readings, like the LE. To be fair, Dr. Carrier, you have suggested an alternative theory in your scholarship, identifying Ariston as a possible suspect for the LE, but here are the problems with your theory. First, Eusebius, who specifically addresses the question on the long ending of Mark to Marinus, also includes in his histories information on Ariston, but discusses this figure in another context and does not draw this conclusion you're asserting. Second, if Ariston did add the passage in the 2nd century, why did it take until the 4th century for the LE to show up when you said it became popular? Since you discount the patristic testimony that possibly quotes the passage leading up to the 4th century, it betrays your theory. For if it was added by Ariston, then it would have explained why Irenaeus and others were quoting it. But since you reject that testimony, the position is weakened. Third, you have no corroborating evidence to support the note added in the 13th century that was found in the Armenian manuscript. Where are the letters or synod from the ancient world speaking of the LE being added in by Ariston? Otherwise, this theory amounts to mere speculation. Your theory is still missing a mechanism like an Uthman, the 3rd Caliph, who made a revision of the Quran and burned the other copies for the Muslim communities, to explain how it could have been done on a massive scale in Christianity, to account for the LE in the Apostolic Greek, Aramaic, and Latin textual traditions. In addition, Dr. Carrier, you state at the beginning of your treatise that you won't even explore the possibility the LE could have been removed. But we have documentation from Nikon in the 10th century accusing the Armenians of casting out scriptures from their texts, PA, and Augustine offers corroborating testimony on the same passage in the 4th. You even cite an example of a late manuscript that omits the entire reference to serpents in the LE. Logically, you can't rule out a priori. According to Tertullian and Irenaeus, in the 2nd century Marcion removed large portions of Jewish readings from Luke and 10 letters of Paul. We can even provide documentation to establish motive to why the LE would be removed, citing the greatest anti-Christian scholar of the ancient world, Proffer of Tyre, who probably made fun of the LE. Instead of using postmodern narratives invented in the late 18th century, why not accept the apostolic polity as described by Irenaeus, Tertullian, Eusebius, and Richard Hooker, which authenticates the LE as the official words of Mark's Gospel?